Okay, class, let's go through this really quickly for our introduction to nouns. Um, we know that from the previous day we have the simple sentence, which is like a word sandwich. The noun is the bread. Then the verb is the cheese. Noun, verb, noun. So you already know about different types of nouns. These are just a few of them. I'm limiting us to 6 different types for this class. Maybe we'll talk about more later. But you have count nouns, non-count nouns, abstract nouns, concrete nouns, and then proper and common, which I'm sure you've heard about. But let's go over it all again because nouns are really important. Proper versus common. Proper nouns are names of people, places, and institutions. Here's a sentence: Walter lives in Scotland and works at Pancake House. Here's one with common nouns, which are also people, places, and things, but there is no capital. A man eats pancakes in his kitchen. So Walter is a person, uh, Scotland is a place, and Pancake House is an institution. Then below you have man, that's going to go under people, pancakes is going to go under thing, and kitchen is going to go under a place. Abstract versus concrete. Concrete nouns are physical objects, they're people or things, and abstract nouns are ideas or things. Let's look at an example here. Life, wall, light, book, and movement. Abstract or concrete. Life is going to be abstract, wall is going to be concrete. You might even have a concrete wall. Light is abstract. However, if you're thinking about the lights in the ceiling that you can actually take out of the wall and touch them, those are actually going to be concrete. You have book, which is concrete, and you have movement, which is abstract. Count versus non-count nouns. Count nouns can be separated and thus counted, and non-count nouns such as liquids, materials that cannot be separated, and also abstract qualities. You might be confused by certain words like bread. Usually English speakers don't say breads, they'll say loaves of bread, or they'll say slices of bread. So sometimes if you do get a little bit confused by certain words like bread or a word like water, just know that you can add additional words to that original word and you can modify it in that way too. Knowledge of nouns is going to be really important when discussing articles and quantifiers, and basically knowledge of nouns is just generally important for knowledge of English grammar. However, we don't need to know everything, right? There are certain things that we need to know, and these are a few of them. Where nouns usually appear in sentences, we need to know that, how nouns indicate possession, and how nouns change the meaning of other nouns. Okay, so let's look at those a little bit more closely. Where do nouns appear? They might be the subject, the object, and we didn't talk about this the other day, but they might also be the complement. Doug ate cereal. Doug is the subject. Cereal is the object. That's stuff that we've already covered. But let's talk about the complement for a second. Doug is a boy. Boy is actually a complement there, and it changes the meaning of Doug. Also, without boy, that would be an incomplete sentence, and you would be left with just Doug is. Okay, so the difference between complements and objects, an object is the noun or pronoun being acted upon, whereas the complement is necessary to complete the sentence, and it usually defines the subject in some way. Let's look at these two examples. Again, Doug is a boy versus Doug sits on a boy. You can see that boy in this example changes the meaning of Doug. We get more information about him. Whereas sits on a boy, Doug sits on a boy, boy is an object being sat upon or acted upon by Doug. Okay, so boy is a complement in the first example and an object in the second example. To indicate possession, you need to have a knowledge of nouns and how nouns work. Nouns usually tell us who owns something, and that's a big part of the English language for better or for worse. You need to know the plural forms of nouns, if there is one, and that might not be the case if the noun is abstract or non-count. And you also need to include an apostrophe. So let's look at this example. That is Jim's cake. Okay, so we add an apostrophe and an S to Jim to let us know that the cake is owned by Jim. Changing the meaning using nouns. Nouns can come in pairs. So you might have the first noun in the pair, and we call that a modifier. There are different types of modifiers than just noun modifiers, but you have a word like bus station, okay? Um, and then sometimes these nouns, there might be hyphenated, like changing room, right? You put the hyphen in there because people might be confused and think that the room itself is changing, okay, as opposed to a place where people go to change their clothes. And there are also nouns that have just been combined over time because they've been used so frequently together. Now, I know that this is not a good example in terms of being gender neutral, but policeman is a good example for grammar. Normally today we would say police officer instead, but policeman is pretty common usage, and it's an example of two nouns that have been combined together, and now they're just one word. Common noun problems, count and non-count, they tend to present a lot of issues. The plural forms of nouns can be really difficult, just remembering which ones. Possessive forms, we're going to return to that when we do more work on punctuation and we look at apostrophes. Using nouns as modifiers can be difficult, and I think that it's difficult because it often relies a lot on memorization or just knowledge of a specific field of study. In conclusion, however, I think that we want to remember that there are different types of nouns. We talked about 6 today. And there are different places that nouns typically appear in sentences. Finally, nouns can be used as modifiers. They're very important to help us to indicate possession. And I think that they're a good place for us to start because they have a big influence on other grammar topics. So that's it for our quick lesson on nouns. Let's move on to verbs.